All right, what is up, y'all? Welcome in, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark. Hope you are staying dry. Hope you're staying warm. Welcome to the Friday episode of GC Live. It has been a minute. Hope y'all have been well. Thanks for joining us. We got plenty to talk about, but first, let me tell you about our buddy Clint Hammond, CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Clint's our guy. You know the drill. You know the spill at this point. If you're in the market to buy a home, whether you're a first-time home buyer, an investor, multi-time home buyer, whatever in between all that you fall, hit up Clint. He's going to walk you through that whole process and let you know what options you may have in terms of your mortgage. Again, 803-422-6797. As I said, it's been a while since Chris and I have been on here. Kendall and I did do, if you missed it, a little recruiting rundown video earlier this week where we talked about a couple of the commitments at the time. But we're going to kind of work in reverse order. We'll talk about the news of today. And then depending on how much time we have, we will go back in time and talk about some of the other guys who have committed since we have been on. Chris, the news today, Alabama linebacker transfer, originally from Germany, a guy South Carolina did recruit a little bit out of high school. Now officially a Gamecock has committed and signed Justin Okoronkwo, who transfers in now, already official, will be on campus here. He's already on campus, what I'm saying. Will be moving in here, making it officially official very, very soon. And a guy that Carolina kind of, it fits the category of they're always working in the portal, right? And this was a guy we were at least able to give our subscribers a little bit of a heads up. Hey, keep an eye on this guy. South Carolina's tracking him. South Carolina's working him. There was always a little bit more going on behind the scenes here than we were able to say. Hopefully they were able to get the hint there, and South Carolina closes it out today, landing a really high upside linebacker here that is officially part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, the portal class isn't closed out, Wes, but we're on kind of the back end of it. And this is, maybe the start of a strong finish, if that's not too much of a contradiction. Look, Carolina came into this cycle wanting a couple of linebackers, ideally. And it's been interesting to watch the progression of kind of just how everything's evolved, right? It was, hey, you're looking at Josiah Trotter, who ended up going to Missouri. You're looking at Andrew Jones, who you got a commitment from, but then he very quickly flipped to Ole Miss. And it's kind of, where does that leave you? And where it ends up leaving you is you get actually a couple guys who both have been at Alabama. Sean Murphy was at Bama, then moved over to FSU. And then Justin O, I think we're going to make it easier every now and then, Wes. Justin O, the German native, who spent his freshman year last season at Alabama. Once Carolina got Murphy in the boat, it really looked like, Wes, they were being pretty choosy, knowing that you have the spring portal window, but they wanted to get a second guy if it was a guy that made sense. And, man, this one makes a lot of sense for them. There's a lot of value here, right? First of all, this is a talented guy. I mean, he's 6'3", 230. He's only played football for several years, so he's not super experienced. This isn't a guy that grew up playing Pee-wee. He played other sports growing up. So he's still got a ton of potential and upside, but he has a little bit of seasoning because he played in every game for Alabama last year. Only a handful of those were actual defensive snaps. He was mostly a special teams guy, but he did kind of get his feet wet. And if you talk to somebody who's actually seen this kid, just got a text from somebody at Bama today talking about what a big get this was for South Carolina. Once he hit the portal, sometimes, Wes, a guy hits the portal and the school that he's leaving is, healthy transfer or will be just fine. We can upgrade. Bama wanted to keep this kid, and it was reiterated to me how highly Nick Saban actually thought of this kid because he was the head coach when Justin actually committed to the Crimson Tide. So really a nice pickup for Carolina. It's a little different because you're not getting a guy who's, a fifth-year senior coming in. He is still relatively inexperienced as a player. He will probably next season be playing the biggest role that he's played in his young collegiate career, but just a lot of upside here and kind of continuing along the lines of the last couple of years, particularly last year. You look at Carolina's linebacker room and say, man, they have really done well with athleticism. These last two additions, I think, especially with this newest one, you've done well to replace some of the outgoing athleticism by bringing more in.
Yeah, and that has been, frankly, a little bit of, in my opinion, an adjustment in approach where, it was maybe a little bit more about, I don't know, instincts and what are some more kind of technical qualities that a guy brings to that linebacker position. It feels to me like the last two cycles, certainly going back to especially last transfer portal cycle, it was let's go get traits. And I think we saw that with this defense this year. We saw it pay off. And Carolina runs especially when you talk about what they were able to put up front this year and having a guy coming back like Dylan Stewart to create havoc up front too. I feel like this is a fairly aggressive defense in terms of letting your guys go be aggressive and make plays and letting those traits actually show, kind of turning them loose, maybe keeping it simplified enough that they can go play fast. And I think this dude is a very good fit, in my opinion, for what Carolina does on defense. And if you want a little bit of an idea of what he is all about, if you have the time, if you have some time to kill, just go flip on Alabama's A-Day, their spring game from last spring. He led the team in tackles. I believe he was credited with 11 tackles in that game. And he was a starter for Alabama in that game, which obviously you're splitting your teams. So he was kind of on the real life two deep, but in the A-Day game, he's a starter at linebacker and just made a lot of plays in that game. If you go back and watch, you can even see as a young guy, and this was him coming in, he's only played about 5 years of football, coming in. So it would have been very new to what they were doing and was still able to go out there and make some plays. You just watch him run, watch him move. He fits in size-wise with that Alabama defense. Like he doesn't, in the case of an Alabama defense, when I say he doesn't stand out, I mean that physically in a good way. Like this was a freshman coming in from another country and just appeared to fit right in with that size and speed you always typically see across the board from an Alabama defense. And so I look at this guy, and again, if you want to go watch a little bit of sort of the size speed combination, there were some missed plays by him as well, and he's still got 11 tackles. So I think once he cleans it up a little bit with, the tutelage of Clayton White, of course, he will have had a full season in Alabama since that game, if you're watching it on YouTube from last spring. And I do think that this is a potential early starter type for South Carolina out of the portal. Like we always try to set those expectations early on. What does, what's realistic? Is this somebody who's going to push for a starting job? Is this somebody going to push for a backup job? Not that anything is guaranteed at this point, but my early favorites, just after what I've heard about him and what I've seen from him, would probably be, J.R. Johnson. There are high expectations for him to be a starter next year. There's some guys that Justin's going to have to fight off, but a very real chance if he does what he's supposed to do, if he works hard, if he gets settled in like he needs to, a very real chance that you could have just landed a starter out of the portal, I think.
Wes, does this remind you any of, a little different because, again, Carolina's going to be younger at linebacker this coming year in terms of returners, especially than what they had last year. Because last year you could look at it and say, at the minimum, you're getting back Debo and Bam, two guys who can start for you, right? But remember when Carolina added Demetrius Knight, and Demetrius had played more college football than Justin has, but you add him in and then you start hearing some little rumblings. This dude is really athletic. And then, it goes a little bit farther. This dude may be really hard to keep off the field. This guy may start. Does it remind you, obviously Justin hasn't been on campus yet to where we can start hearing some of those things, but any similarities in your mind there?
Yeah, and I think that is the hope, is that he can step in, frankly, and provide some of that athleticism that you saw last year from D Knight, or saw this year, I guess we'll still kind of say. And yeah, and also a little tidbit here, Chris. He obviously is not experienced. He doesn't have the seasoning that D Knight did, but he's actually already 21 years old. So this is not a younger guy. He has some age to him, has some maturity to him. He doesn't have a wife and kids and a 401k like D Knight.
Not that we know of.
Yeah, that guy was just built different a little bit. I think definitely an older, more mature guy than about anybody you'll ever see come in. Those guys are unicorns, I think. But in terms of what you could possibly go get out of the portal, I think this is as close as you're going to get to possibly being able to replace a D Knight. And he's got kind of the thing about D Knight, not just a speed guy. He had that length, he had that size, and you look at Justin O with room to grow in South Carolina's strength and conditioning program. He is a bigger guy, especially for today's linebacker standards. Like you don't need to be 250, but if you play at 228, 230 with speed, that's going to work out for you pretty well, more than likely. And I think you just, again, if you're kind of hardcore about it, just go spend 15 minutes. You can flip through the plays to where 41 is on the field for Alabama, and you're going to see him being physical. He, I always kind of look, does a guy insert his will into a play when he doesn't have to? Like if there's kind of a pile up, does he want that physicality, or does he kind of shy away a little bit? This is a guy, he's going to stick his nose in there. He's also going to run plays down sideline to sideline. I'm not saying he's perfect yet, that he's a complete, finished, developed product by any means in terms of him as a player, but the ability to just go do everything you need to be able to do athletically from that position, I think it is all there. And again, back to your point, man, they have gone all in kind of on that mindset at linebacker. Let's not forget Sean Murphy. That's a guy who's going to instantly be on the 2 deep, you would think. And I even go back to what Darren Usher told us when we had him on GC Live. And he was talking about this linebacking core coming in among the true freshmen, right? And I kind of had missed this the first time around, Chris, but I think he basically said something like, hey, these are the guys we feel like are going to build the foundation for our linebacking core in the future. So you do look at it, it is going to be tough to replace a Debo, a D Knight, a Bam Martin Scott, assuming they don't have him back, which right now I wouldn't count on it. So it is going to be tough. There may be a transition at the beginning of the year, especially. But don't you feel like we're starting to kind of see the pieces come together where you don't know exactly how, there'll be a guy that surprises maybe and is better than we think. There'll be a guy that maybe doesn't take the step. However, it does kind of feel like the makings of a good linebacking core 2 deep is starting to come together.
Yeah, it requires, I think, a little bit more projection. Well, probably, to be fair, Wes, a lot more projection, right? And the biggest reason is you were losing the 3 guys, the ones you just mentioned, that played the most significant role. So anytime there's that level of turnover with guys that played that much, that had that much experience, that much leadership, in particular with a couple of those guys, it creates some questions. And man, that would be the case, Wes, even if we were looking at the roster going, well, here's a couple of juniors that have come up in the program for 3 years and have been around a really long time. You don't have that as much. The closest guy to that, maybe like a Jaron Willis, right? Who's really showed some flashes in 2023, didn't play as much this past season because of the depth, but at the same time as someone that you're looking at on the roster saying, okay, that's the guy that could take a step forward. And frankly, they need to take a step forward. You've got J.R. Johnson. What do they do with Wendell Gregory? Does he stay at edge? That seems very possible. You have a couple transfers coming in. You have a talented freshman group with some guys led by, in my opinion, Wes Donovan Darden, guy who really picked up some buzz with his performance in the Shrine Bowl in particular. You can see the talent, you can see the body types, the athleticism along the lines of what you saw last year, but you don't see the proven production and experience yet. So you can see it coming together. It's just going to take some projection, and I think it's going to take some development. I think we'll have a better sense, at least after this spring, about how things are going. But you do look at the room and say, okay, you can see athletically and from a numbers standpoint how this thing's coming together.
Yeah, and I don't know if we knew what D Knight was going to be this time last year. We knew there was an opportunity for him to be really good. And Bengali Kamara, I know it didn't work out. Like, he left. He kind of just dipped out in the middle of the year. But in terms of the evaluation, I mean, Bengali ended up being, I would say, a couple of steps better than maybe I thought he was going to be when they landed him as well. But both those, I mean, D Knight went from being, okay, a great athlete. He was really good at Charlotte. Can he do it at the SEC level? You've made this point. He stepped up to the SEC level and had a better year than he had at Charlotte, which is that there's kind of a fascinating case study there for me. It's like, all right, typically you're going, all right, this guy did this at that level. Can he just be successful at a higher level, but to a lesser degree? He just took it to a completely different stratosphere, I feel like. So why, how, what can you take away from that with other guys? And not that that's the case with Justin O. He's going SEC to SEC. He's an Alabama guy. So just kind of the point I'm making goes to show you there still is not a science to this. Like, there's still gray area for who pans out, who doesn't, who takes a huge step forward in terms of what they're able to give you. And I think, in my opinion, it is ultimately all about, can you get enough guys who just have a chance that the odds end up in your favor, right? Like, there's only so many Dylan Stewarts or just guys where you just circle high school or transfer portal and you say, that guy's 100% a contributor. That guy's 100% an elite guy. There's only so many of those guys walking schools around the country, walking the halls around schools. So anyway, we'll see what that group ends up looking like, but you can see the structure that they are starting to put into place. Let's go back, Chris, and we'll have more content on GamecockCentral.com throughout the day and then into the weekend as well about what Justin O brings to the team. Let's talk about what some of these other guys bring. And I would say maybe one of my favorite pickups of this cycle, Rasul Faison, Utah State running back transfer, in my opinion, just bona fide stud, has the production, actually has the size, is a good bit bigger than you go back and look. If you initially look at his profile on 3, it's going off of his high school weight. You see 181. You're like, okay, this guy's kind of tiny. And then you see his college weight listed on a bio. You're like, oh, he's 200 pounds. That works. Then you start digging around. You start asking around, and you hear 215, 220. And you watch him run, and that actually makes a lot of sense. You go, okay, I see where some of that power, some of that strength comes from. And I just think adding someone like this to your running back room, a running back room that already does have talent, and having him compete, having him come in and potentially push for starter type snaps is just a really nice still kind of at the end of this transfer portal window.
Yeah, it was very interesting, man, because he just came on the radar a good bit later in the process. Not that, the coaching staff said, oh, man, the way that the recruiting operation is set up, you mentioned Darren Usher earlier. He told us when we had him on the show, like, you're starting transfer portal work the previous off season, during the season. Like, you have to know everybody, even if there's a chance that they may jump in the portal. You better be ready to have an opinion and have a plan if somebody jumps in the portal. But we know that, we were tracking Justice Haynes, for a long time, the Alabama transfer who ended up going to Michigan. But the early part of the process for Faison was maybe more quiet, not only with South Carolina, but other schools. But then you look at some of the schools recruiting him, came out with a top 6. I think Bama was actually in it. Florida State was in it. You might remember a couple of the other ones, Wes. North Carolina. There were a few others in there. And once he got to South Carolina for a visit, things seemed to really turn in a favorable direction for them. But this is a fascinating guy, I think, for a lot of reasons. He's from Connecticut originally. And, dude, his high school numbers were insane. As a senior, he had 1,800 carries, almost 1,800 carries, 1,800 yards, almost 1,900, averaged 9.5 yards a carry and 30 touchdowns. The previous year as a junior, he was even better, 2,900 yards and 42 touchdowns. I mean, the guy just put up bonkers numbers in high school, like video game numbers, easy mode video game numbers on NCAA. And then he went, junior college, Marshall for a year, junior college, and then Utah State. And so he's got a lot of experience. He's been around the game a while. And the interesting thing that I heard was talking to some people who have known him at the college level. Like, he's not a young player, but they still feel like there's upside. They still feel like he's getting better, because if you look at his 2023 season at Utah State versus 2024, like, he took a big leap as a player. So really interesting background, but also, Wes, just his play style is really interesting. I mean, I'm glad that we found out that he's a little bit bigger than the listed weight. It helps explain a little bit how he can break so many tackles. The dude per PFF forced 69 missed tackles last year, which is a crazy high number. But he's just got this knack for getting north and south while avoiding defenders, right? He's not just running over guys. He's not a speed demon, but he's just got really good vision and balance as a runner. And that, he's a chain mover. And so it'll be very interesting once he gets on campus to see how he acclimates, but really good track record so far.
Yeah. Vision, balance. I would say patience as well. Just that ability. He reminds me of a lot of your successful modern NFL running backs, in that it's not really so much about top end speed. It's about, do you have the patience to wait for holes to develop? Do you have the explosiveness if you do sort of wait to hit that top end speed in a hurry once a hole does develop? Can you set up blocks? Can you set up moves in the open field where you can make a guy miss or run through them? Can you help in the passing game, or are you a guy that has to come off the field on third downs? I do think if you look at his PFF grades, he would have had he's already up there. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick, because I kind of did the numbers in terms of where they ranked overall. If you look at just his run game grade, so not his PFF overall grade, his run game grade, he is tied for 8th in FBS this year. His overall grade, which was still very good, 78.9 on the PFF scale, is very good. He was even better the year before, 84.9 with a run grade of 90. Well, his overall is dinged a little bit because of pass pro. And so that's an area, whenever there are pass pro issues, some of that is going to be technique. Some of that can be correctable, I think, which maybe is a little bit where your guy, your source is saying, hey, there's some things he can get better at here too to make him an even better player. If you can improve that, because he does have a good frame, we were told, Chris, even though he's bigger than listed, they don't think he's maxed out yet in size either. He can keep adding some size. A little bit of pass pro, if you do have that size, is just want to, and technique, and have you been taught properly? Those things will come with time. But again, tied for 8th in FBS in run game grade this year. That 69 forced missed tackles you talked about, tied for 8th in the FBS in that as well. 3.84 yards after contact per carry. That number is just a notch above what Rocket Sanders was this season, just for a little bit of context on what that number even means. And then he also had 21 carries of 15 yards or more, which was tied for 10th among FBS backs. So you're not talking about a guy that's going to necessarily be a threat to hit the 80-yard home run ball every time, but you're talking about a guy who is a threat to hit the 15-yard chunk, explosive run, first down run. He was way up there in just first downs gained this season as well among all FBS backs. So he's a guy that can knock off that chunk at will almost. And we were also told he's a willing sort of receiver in terms of puts effort into running routes, going, getting open. Didn't put up huge numbers in the passing game, but that was something Carolina is high on with this kid. And you look at putting him in a backfield with Lenoris Sellers. What was one of the things we talked about the latter half of the year with Lenoris? Getting the ball out on broken plays and just flipping the ball out to his running backs. I think that's something you're going to see with this kid, where he slides right in terms of catching the football, not maybe necessarily even designed, although we did see Carolina as an offense second half of the year get much more productive in their running back screen game. So maybe some one-to-one translation, even if they're different backs, different styles, but one-to-one in what he could do in the passing game, much like what Rocket was able to do there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they are different backs. I mean, it's very interesting. Rocket Sanders is a very unique back. I feel like, when he came out of high school, he was an athlete. He could play receiver. He could play, converted to running back at the college level. Faison is also just a very interesting back. He's not a speed back. He's not a quote unquote big bruising power back. He's just pretty versatile and just interesting, kind of, not a cookie cutter back. It's almost hard to describe in a way. And so now you replace a guy who's kind of a unique talent with another one. Again, different players, but a skill set where he can be an asset in the passing game. And one of Rocket Sanders' greatest attributes, Wes, was his ability to make guys miss, right? I mean, he could turn not much into something, and he could do things like what we saw at the end of the Missouri game, where he's taking a shovel pass and he's willing himself into the end zone. And I think for Faison, it maybe looks different than Rocket. Maybe it's a little less sheer power and a little bit more craftiness, I guess you could say, and vision. But the numbers don't lie, man. I mean, Rocket, and yes, I realize the difference between the SEC and the Mountain West. I grant you that. But Rocket had I think 46 missed tackles this past year forced. And again, Faison was 69. So I don't really care what level you're at. If you're playing on a level of football and you force that many tackles against the competition you're playing at, you're doing something right. Yeah, even I mean, cut those in half, if you want to say that, for the SEC level, and you're still doing pretty well. So, yeah, I'm with you, man. I like this pickup for the Gamecocks. I think he's going to be a guy who can help them a lot. The running back room, again, that's another one where it's starting to take shape in terms of who the players are, but how does it actually shape up in terms of the 1 to 2 guy, your starter and then your number 2 guy? Those are the ones that frankly are going to get the most carries over the course of a season. Who ends up being that? And One other thing, Wes. Turn it back over. No fumbles this past year for Rasul Faison when he carried the football or in the passing game.
That, I mean, let's be honest.
Means something.
It was, there were a lot of explosive plays from Carolina and, from their backfield. We'll put it like that, but a lot of fumbles this year.
Yes.
So that matters. It does matter. And I do think let's not get too caught up in, let's not forget the guys that are returning. Like there's a lot of talent in this room. Attaway, of course, Jordan Howell, of course, Matt Fuller, but I think you were going to need that fourth guy, whether it was somebody who was kind of tacking on at the end or whether it was somebody coming in at the top, potentially competing for that starting job, and they get that in Faison. And to your point earlier, man, this is a guy a lot of people, a lot of schools wanted in their backfield. None more upset from what I saw online than the FSU fans. So this stuff happens so quick. Sometimes you don't really get a hold for who else is trying to be involved, who else apparently Florida State, at least judging by what their people were saying, like their media, their fans, apparently Florida State was very much in this one or thought they were very much in this one. But doesn't it just feel like this was a case of both sides just kind of being like, oh, this is a really good fit for everybody.
Yeah, it does. It just made all the sense in the world. He fit what Carolina wanted to do. I was told, Wes, I think you were told the same, that just not only like as a player on the field, but like just culturally from that kind of just fit, like program fit on both sides, everybody felt really comfortable. And then obviously Faison was a guy looking to jump up a level to Power 4, and he had a bunch of very quality options to do that. Once he got to South Carolina, he felt like that was the place. So there's obviously playing time opportunity, but he seemed to feel comfortable with Shane Beamer's program as well.
Yeah, man. All right, before we move any further, let me tell you about our friends over at Game Time. I've told y'all before, I used Game Time to go to Atlanta for the World Series a few years ago, and I didn't even, with everything going on, I didn't even realize this, Chris. There's a different championship in Atlanta coming up in about 10 days, I guess. The national title game is actually in Atlanta. So maybe you got a wild hair. Maybe you just say, screw it. It's right down the road. I'm going to the national title game. Of course, all other tickets for events, concerts, sports, everything in between. Use our friends over at Game Time. And terms do apply on this. But if you're not a Game Time user yet, go ahead, download the Game Time app, create an account, use code OWN3 for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply, but create an account, redeem the code OWN3. You'll get $20 off that first purchase. One of the great things about Game Time is the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get the best price if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You also have job loss assurance. If you lose your job and need a refund, they've got you covered. Event cancellation protection, automatic full refunds for events that are canceled or not rescheduled, and 24-hour return guarantee. Return your tickets within 24 hours from time of purchase for a full credit to your Game Time account. No questions asked. Use what we use. That's the Game Time app, or head on over to GameTime.co. All right, those are the two kind of biggest gets here recently since we've been away a little bit in terms of doing the show. Let's talk a little bit about what could be next, Chris, in terms of South Carolina closing this thing out for this window. If you're on social media, you saw freshmen are arriving and moving in on campus. You saw transfer portal guys are getting into town. That signals, all right, the semester is about to start. So you're running out of time to add new players. A few guys that South Carolina fans have been maybe dialed in on. Let's start with Brandon Cisse. Right down the road, Sumter guy, went to Lakewood High School, spent 2 years at NC State. It appears by all indications was actually really happy there, but their defense coordinator got a head job, and he enters the portal. South Carolina involved, Ole Miss involved, Georgia trying to be involved, Florida involved. Notice a trend. SEC teams, SEC programs heavily tracking and heavily wanting Brandon Cisse. Our guy Lane Kiffin just trolling like crazy yesterday, posting from Sumter, South Carolina. He was in town, I guess, to see him. Cisse, fresh off a South Carolina visit, apparently about to visit Florida. What do you think on this one, man?
I mean, this is a guy that, I remember when he came out of high school, and I think there were several people looking around going, this kid looks pretty good. Like, why is he not getting a little bit more recruiting love? And that happens everywhere, but it seems like most years, Wes, there's some guys that sneak out of the Palmetto State and end up out of state and have Clemson and Carolina fans going, maybe we should have given this guy a harder look. But with the portal now, you can remedy that on all sides. And so really did play well. I know you've heard really good things about what he's done out there, Wes. Seems like a good kid, is a good player. It is valuable because he has multiple years left. He's kind of a get for South Carolina where, they have Miles Norwood in the class as a DB, but this is a kid you look at and go, okay, this is a Palmetto State kid. We want him on our team. We want him to make our team better. So it makes a lot of sense, right, to take him, even though maybe you didn't come into this cycle thinking DB was as big of a need from a numbers standpoint. He makes a ton of sense. But the competition, as you just laid out, has been significant. I know Ole Miss has been pushing extremely hard, as have many others. I've actually heard this morning Missouri also is evidently trying to get involved. So kind of your typical players on the recruiting trail in the transfer portal wire have been involved. I think Carolina does have a good shot here. I think playing back in Columbia, close to his home of Sumter, does have appeal for Cisse, but he's got a lot of great options, and everybody's trying to make it tough on the Gamecocks at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think this would be a fantastic get if Carolina can make it happen. And to your point, just kind of an example of, all right, does this guy potentially make us better? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. There is a thought process out there. I'm a little bit, I think, in this category. Could you potentially move Kilgore back to more of a true safety this year? I think adding someone like Cisse to that room at corner/nickel gives you a little bit more freedom to potentially put Kilgore in Nicky Mawari's role, basically, as his replacement at safety. We'll see if they're able to do that. We'll see if they want to do that. That is maybe a decision for a day down the road. But I think this would free you up a little bit more to possibly do that. Not that you couldn't do it anyway with some of the other guys at corner. But Cisse, a guy who's played slot corner before, a guy who's played outside corner before, really played, he was more of a reserve, but was playing from the moment he arrived at NC State. His second year there, dealt with some injuries, but when he was healthy, he was a starter this past season. So this season that just finished up, heavy, just from a mindset standpoint, I would say a good fit. Again, not to keep going back to that well, but a good fit for what South Carolina wants to be on defense in terms of just that dog mindset that we talk about. Everybody always thinks about DJ Swearinger, and can you bring that mindset back to this South Carolina team? We saw that mindset from this defense this year, I think, and not that I'm putting the Swearinger label on him, but he is someone, one of the first things I was told, Chris, this dude plays with a chip. Like, he's out there to prove he belongs every time he steps on the field. And I think there's something to be said for that, and something to be said for Carolina potentially. We'll see, adding that to their defense. And just look at the list of schools we just talked about. There's a reason why all those SEC defenses are saying, hey, this guy's a fit for what we do. This guy can come in and play. So we'll see which way that one goes. Carolina battling, Carolina trying to make it happen. Not a lock by any means. Lots of teams still involved, but Gamecocks, I think, firmly in it. The other position, it looks like they kind of want to add before you sort of start to turn the page to portal window number 2 would be defensive line. Terry Webb right now. And again, the one thing about doing videos when it comes to recruiting is God, this stuff changes fast. So if you were to watch my video I did with Kendall earlier this week, I'm pretty sure I'm on there saying, hey, Carolina, I feel pretty good about where they stand with Terry Webb. Yeah. And at the time, true, I did.
Mm-hmm.
As of right now, if you're watching this live or if you're listening later on, as of right now, it's 2:44 p.m. It has trended more away from South Carolina, I think, with Terry Webb, and more towards Carolina potentially being the school for Devontae Miles, who is the Bowling Green defensive lineman. I would still think, regardless of what happens there, Chris, that they will continue to look at that position, portal window number 2, to see who's out there, to see what's out there. But as of right now, our info does have it kind of trending away from Webb and more towards Miles being the most likely guy during this window.
Yep. And Miles, again, 2:45 here, Friday, January 10th. We'll do our timestamp, Wes. Yesterday got in for his visit to South Carolina, right? On
Thursday morning, yep.
Thursday the 9th. And so I think there's going to be a good shot there to bring it forward. Like, if let's say they land Miles, today, the next day, let's say Miles is in the class. I totally agree with you. I think you keep your eyes and ears open, even in this portal window, because there's still guys in it, right? But I think you really start gearing up for the spring, and that'll give you the opportunity to, first of all, assess what you have on the roster. You could come out of the spring with one of 3 things. Yes, we have as much work as, we got to go get some guys. Oh, it's a little bit better than we thought, or it's worse than we thought. Like, any of those are options. But I think even if it's a little bit better than you thought coming out of the spring, let's say they go in and they feel great about Goodwine and Barrett, and some of the young guys are coming on. Xavier Hardy looks as advertised. They're still going to go in and say, we need a guy. And I think that includes, Wes, the edge position. If we're talking about up front, indications that we've gotten, South Carolina's going to keep their eyes open in terms of an edge if it's a really, really impactful type of guy. But defensive tackle, from just like a numbers and needs standpoint, would be the biggest one. So we obviously don't know next spring. That's a few months away. We don't know who's going to be in the portal, what that's going to look like. But I do expect there'll be more activity on the interior of the defensive line in particular at that time.
What if Brownlow Dindy comes in and it's just like,
yeah,
everybody's like, oh my God, where'd this guy come? You know what I'm saying? Like, you just don't know until you get them out there. And that's a little bit of the, he has not played a ton at Texas A&M. So you really just don't know what that is going to look like. Xavier Hardy, JUCO guy, you don't know how it's going to translate. I mean, what Xavier Hardy just gets out there and you're like, this guy looks like TJ Sanders. We don't have to be worried at all. You don't want to count on that, but that is where you are. I think maybe one of the freshmen. Again, you don't want to count on it, but maybe you're just like, hey, this guy is ready. You just don't know until you get him out there on a practice field against other college athletes and see what that looks like. So I think clearly Carolina would have loved to have added a Terry Webb, and that's not official yet that he's going anywhere else. But I would just say, like, right now, don't like start penciling him into Carolina's class. It seems like that one is trending a different direction. But all in all, let me pull up these numbers, man. I believe that is for Carolina 11 commitments during this window. You would potentially have a 12th if you get Devontae Miles, potentially a 13th if you get Brandon Cisse. And then unless – now we do still have – we got 5-day window from – I guess right now you're just talking about like a Penn State. 5-day window for whoever loses tonight. Then a 5-day window for the 2 national title teams. Maybe somebody else pops up. You don't know. But for the most part, you're kind of getting to the end of this cycle. And I do want to make one point real quick before we head on out of here, Chris. I don't think this part is as fun or as exciting or as just headliney, I guess, in terms of clicks. Roster retention. And obviously we, Gamecock Central and Garnet Trust have always kind of been connected, and we've got a strong relationship with all those guys. So maybe we're biased, but the job Garnet Trust has done, the job the fan base has done, giving those resources, the job that Darren Usher and those guys have done, keeping this roster intact. I'm working on an article right now. Maybe going to go up today. Maybe we'll go up this weekend, Chris. But healthy transfers. Do you know how many starts from the 2024 season there are among the guys who transferred out?
Among the guys who transferred from South Carolina, how many starts
from this season?
I need to look over the list one more time. I may even go as low as 0.
Well, and again, I haven't put the article out yet, so I probably need to double check this. I was working through it this morning, but by my count, it's 1.
Really?
And that is when Robbie Ashford started in place of
Lenore Sellers. That should have been the obvious one. That's kind of a duh situation there. But
if you go back, Mo Kaba would have started a couple of years ago before he got hurt. If you start talking about career starts, Robbie started some at Auburn. I didn't count career starts, but in terms of this season, the guys that are on that list, and, it doesn't mean that there's not talent in that group. There certainly are some guys that I think are going to go find a nice role somewhere else. And I think Carolina would have welcomed Robbie back to be the backup with open arms. But he wanted to start. Everybody knew that. Everybody shook hands. He goes and gets that chance at Wake Forest. I've always thought Connor Cox was going to be a pretty good player, potentially for Carolina down the road. He quickly gets an opportunity at UNC. I think that speaks to, he's a good player, but was probably behind Michael Smith, behind Brady Hunt, behind Jordan Dingle, Maurice Brown. It was going to be hard to break into a spot here. So among the players that have eligibility remaining, Carolina pretty much batted 1,000 on getting the guys back through this window. Now, do you have to survive a second window? Yes, you do. Let's be accurate with it. But in terms of being able to keep this group together, keep your core together, that's the obvious ones, the Lenore Sellers of the world, the Dylan Stewarts, the Josiah Thompsons, then your Nick Harbors, your guys like that. But I think it goes well beyond that. It's about your core guys that you project to be bigger players down the road, your Tro Balls, your J.R. Johnsons, who's going to have to step into a big role this year, your Vakari Swains, your Lewis Solomons, guys like that, keeping them intact. Worth pointing that out one more time.
Yeah, because, remember the 2022 season, Wes, finished out very strong. But after that year, you had some guys leave that were, frankly, at the time, a little bit head-scratching to the fan base, and you did not have that this time. You didn't have the head-scratching defection. You also didn't have, just quite frankly, the defection of, here's some guys who were starters and made significant impacts on the roster. So that says something, because that has happened most places. Most places. Not some, I would say most. Remember at the start of the merging of transfer portal NIL, and we were like, it really hasn't hit Georgia yet. It's hitting them now, because it's hitting almost everywhere, where even they'll lose starters and high caliber guys. So it should not be glossed over or just taken for granted that South Carolina was able to retain key pieces of the roster. And again, I like your point, not just the Sellers and Stewarts, those are obvious, but the other key depth pieces, young guys who are going to take a step forward. frankly, just your other starters who are just good, solid players for you.
Mhm.
All those are important to keep. One player that Carolina just got, we talked about at the beginning of the show, Justin Okoronkwo. Bama wanted to keep him. He falls into that category, like a young player who's going to be a key player for them, wanted to keep him, and he left. And so that, I think, speaks volumes about South Carolina and, Garnet Trust and what the staff has done and Beamer's done. You got to have the wins, yes, but also just culturally, NIL, they've done a good job with all that.
What do you think about that Carson Beck news?
Well, once he hit the portal, you're going, all right, he's probably going to Miami. Very interesting. I mean, the season that he had, Wes, probably reduced his stock some. Then he's coming off of the elbow injury. And so when you look at draft grade versus opportunity to go and make a reported $4 million from NIL, and then maybe if you go and have a reset and have a really, really good year at Miami, who was really good on offense this past year with Cam Ward.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're looking at go be with my girlfriend, right, in Miami. Go get a nice chunk of change, go get healthy, kind of have a reset, and then let's go raise my draft stock. Makes a lot of sense.
There was talk. I feel like that was the Alabama-Georgia game early in the year. Weren't they squeezing him into the number one quarterback talk?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I thought that was aggressive in the first place, but now you look at how he played. I mean, frankly, I bet it was not at all what he was hoping for in terms of the projections there. Then you throw in an injury. Then you throw in, I see the national guys talk about, does this dude love ball? You start popping up little red flags for someone who originally you were talking about as possibly like franchise quarterback. Those things kind of start to stack up a little bit. So I will say this, it will be fair or not. I have no idea if he loves ball or not. Like, I don't know if that's just internet talk and it's completely overblown or if there's some truth to that. But lots of distraction at a place like Miami, regardless. Throw in your influencer, very popular girlfriend who's also an athlete and also gets like all the attention in the world. And that's a lot. It's a lot other than football, I feel like. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's a good pickup for Miami. I understand why you make the move. I also saw he had the do not contact tag. So this was probably worked out well before he entered the portal.
Mm-hmm.
Alleged by me. But
well, the funny thing was in the time period when it was reported and before he actually went in, you got the, hey, Carson's going in the portal, Miami's the favorite, like almost immediately after. And then it's like some reports come out. Well, he's going to consider all options, and Ohio State's in the mix in this school. And it's like, all right, guys, we get it. Nobody cares. Like, we know you're going to Miami. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Just go.
I don't think how did Georgia feel? Like, was Georgia kind of ready? And I hate when people speculate about South Carolina about stuff they don't know what they're talking about, and I'm turning around and doing it for other. Yeah. But we're on the outside looking in on this one. Have no, not claiming any inside information whatsoever on the Carson Beck UGA inner workings. But you think Georgia was kind of just, we're okay with moving on.
Makes sense
to an extent. Well, and I think they probably already, obviously, he had said he was going to the draft, so they had already been.
You're planning, yeah.
Are they sort of in the process? Oh, we're working on this guy, that guy, and then he said, "Hey guys, I'm thinking about coming back," and they're kind of like,
Well, maybe coming back wasn't really an option for Carson. It was NFL, or hey, there's always the portal / Miami looming.
Yeah.
There were rumors around the time of his elbow injury announcement, apparently, and this has just been said on social media, but not just by not random fan like reporters in Georgia, that, they had started hearing some scuttle about Miami a little while back. And so, yeah, I think, especially given that Georgia was already like planning for the post Carson Beck era, I guess you could say, they're probably not, oh my gosh, she's maybe going to the portal. Like, we've got to scramble and we got to put together a huge NIL deal. Like, I think both sides just kind of went their separate ways here ultimately.
Yep. And that's fine. That's fine. I mean, he did win a lot of games at Georgia in the 2 seasons he was starter, but it is what it is. All right, so we're out of time. Is there anything else we haven't hit, Chris? We need to hit. I think we hit a lot.
I think we hit a lot. Yeah, we can double back to what we didn't hit later.
Yeah. All right. Maybe something early next week in terms of a show. We'll see what happens with Devontae Miles. Again, not loving Carolina's chances with Terry Webb. We'll keep tracking that one. And then, of course, we'll be tracking Brandon Cisse as well. Come check us out, GamecockCentral.com. We're there. We're only here certain times. We're always over on GamecockCentral.com. We'd love to have you. If you're not a subscriber, we'd love to have you come join us. By the way, I think I still have a few of those codes. So if you made it this far and you're still listening, shoot me a DM on Twitter or just reply to one of my tweets on Twitter. I'll send you a code. I've got a limited number, but if you're not a subscriber, I'll shoot you a code for a discount, or shoot me an email, Wes at GamecockCentral.com. We'll get you to me there. If you're not a subscriber, we'll get you hooked up. All right. He is Chris. I'm Wes. Y'all stay warm. Y'all stay dry. Y'all stay safe. We'll be back next week. Y'all have a good weekend.